My parents and my sister went on a cruise and left me in charge of watching my 8-year-old niece, who has never been able to speak. The moment the door closed, she looked straight at me and calmly said, in a clear voice, "Auntie, don't drink the tea Mom prepared. She planned something." My heart dropped, and a chill ran through my entire body. They say the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones lurking in shadows, but those who stand in plain sight, smiling. They are the ones who share your lineage, your childhood memories, and your deepest confidences. I'm still processing this, but it turns out, the most devastating betrayal often comes not from an enemy, but from the person you call sister. The poison wasn't always obvious. Sometimes, it arrived in a ceramic mug, steeped in chamomile and honey, left by hands that once braided your hair. That day began like any other, only my house felt unnaturally quiet after my parents and sister, Victoria, left for their cruise. My 8-year-old niece, Ruby, was curled on the sofa, seemingly lost in her tablet, a familiar scene. Her selective mutism, diagnosed at 2, had been a constant presence in our lives, a quiet testament to her own inner world. The moment the front door clicked shut, sealing us in, a tiny voice sliced through the silence. "Aunt, don't drink the tea Mom made." My blood didn't just run cold, it felt like it solidified in my veins. My breath hitched. The thermos sat on the kitchen counter, a mundane object now transformed into a ticking bomb. Steam ghosted from the spout where I'd idly loosened the cap, carrying the deceptively comforting scent of chamomile and honey. My hands, without conscious command, began to tremble as I stared at it, then at Ruby, whose dark eyes watched me with an intensity I'd never seen before, a depth that belied her years. "What did you just say?" My voice was a mere rasp against the sudden, oppressive silence of the room. Ruby, unblinking, stepped closer, her small hand reaching for mine, a gesture both innocent and incredibly deliberate. And then she spoke again, her words clear, steady, cutting through the carefully constructed reality I'd lived in for so long. "Mom's been lying about me for 8 years. I can talk. I've always been able to talk. She made me promise to stay silent around everyone except her and Dad." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I instinctively grabbed the cold marble counter, my knuckles stark white against its pristine surface, anchoring myself against the dizzying unraveling of everything I thought I knew. Ruby. My sweet, silent Ruby. We'd seen countless specialists, endured endless therapy sessions, watched with aching hearts as intervention after intervention failed to coax a single word from her. And Victoria, my older sister, the confident, successful, seemingly perfect Victoria, she had worn Ruby's condition like a badge of martyrdom. She'd leveraged it into an entire identity, giving speeches at fundraisers, penning articles about parenting children with special needs, cultivating the image of the devoted, long-suffering mother. "That's impossible," I whispered, the words automatic, a desperate reflex. But even as they left my lips, a sickening clarity began to settle over me. The pieces were already falling into place, chillingly, horribly precise. I was experiencing a classic case of gaslighting, an insidious form of psychological manipulation where an individual is made to question their own memory, perception, and sanity. Victoria hadn't just manipulated Ruby, she had created a false narrative so convincing that it permeated our entire family. Ruby, with a composure that was frankly terrifying in an 8-year-old, pulled out her phone. Her small fingers danced across the screen with practiced ease. "I've been recording things. Mom doesn't know. She thinks I'm just playing games." She handed me the device, its cold glass feeling heavy in my palm. I pressed play on the first video, and Victoria's voice, saccharine and chilling, filled my kitchen. "Remember, baby, if you ever tell anyone you can speak, Daddy will get in very serious trouble. The police will take him away, and it'll be all your fault." The video showed a younger Ruby, her tiny head nodding, tears streaming down her face. The date stamp flashed, 2 months ago. My stomach lurched. I played another clip. This one was older, judging by Ruby's even younger appearance. Victoria's voice again, dripping with false affection. "Good girl for staying quiet at Grandma's house. That's our special secret, remember? If you talk to Aunt Natalie or anyone else, very bad things will happen." I sank into a chair, the phone still clutched in my hand, a cold knot tightening in my chest. How long have you been recording? My voice was barely audible. Since I turned 7, Ruby replied matter-of-factly, making air quotes with her fingers. Mom gave me the phone for communication purposes. She didn't realize I figured out how to hide files in a locked folder. There are 43 videos total. 43 pieces of evidence, each a hammer blow against Victoria's meticulously crafted facade. My mind raced backward, a whirlwind of countless family dinners, holidays, gatherings where Ruby had communicated only through gestures and a tablet. Victoria, always there, translating, controlling the narrative, playing the devoted mother, soaking up the praise from my parents for her patience and strength. The T, I blurted out, the single word cutting through the fog of disbelief, snapping my focus back to the insidious danger lurking on my counter. Why did she leave it? Ruby's expression, usually so placid, darkened. Last night, I heard her on the phone with Dad. They were talking about your inheritance from Grandpa William. Mom said once you were out of the picture, they could contest the will. She mentioned something about making you sick enough to need hospitalization, then documenting your mental health crisis for the lawyers. This was more than just familial discord. This was a calculated, deliberate plot. Grandpa William had passed away 4 months prior, leaving me his entire estate, a decision that had caused an immediate, palpable friction in our family. Victoria, the older sister, the one with a child to provide for, had expected everything. Her tight-lipped smile at the will reading, her hollow congratulations, now replayed in my mind like a sinister premonition. I picked up the thermos, carefully, with a dish towel, a sudden, desperate urge to avoid leaving any additional fingerprints on the potential evidence. We need to call the police. Not yet. Ruby's voice, firm and determined, carried a gravitas far beyond her 8 years. If we call now, Mom will just say I'm lying about talking. She'll get doctors to testify about my selective mutism. She'll make everyone believe you're trying to exploit me for the inheritance. She pulled a small, dog-eared notebook from her backpack. We need to be smarter than her. Looking at that notebook, filled with Ruby's neat, careful handwriting, I realized my niece had been planning this revelation for a very long time indeed. What do you have in mind? Mom and Dad don't come back from the cruise for 5 more days. That gives us time to gather everything we need. Ruby flipped open the notebook, revealing pages of observations, dates, details. Mom's been stealing from your trust fund. The one Grandpa William set up for both of you when you were kids. My blood went cold again. How do you know that? Dad works from home on Thursdays. His office is next to my playroom. The walls are thin. Ruby's matter-of-fact tone made the revelation even more disturbing. He handles Mom's finances. I've heard him talking to the accountant about transferring funds, covering tracks, and making withdrawals look legitimate. For the next hour, Ruby walked me through a labyrinth of deception. My sister, Victoria, and her husband, Tyler, had been systematically draining my trust fund for 3 years. Using a power of attorney, Victoria had convinced me to grant her after a surgery when I needed help managing my affairs temporarily. I'd never revoked it. Why would I? She was my sister. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Victoria had been my closest confidant growing up. We'd shared secrets, supported each other through heartbreaks and career changes, celebrated each other's victories. When Ruby was born, I'd been in the delivery room. I'd rocked her to sleep, changed her diapers, loved her like my own daughter. All while Victoria was plotting my downfall. There's more, Ruby said quietly, pulling up a document on her phone. Mom's been keeping a journal. She backs it up to the cloud. I know her password because I watched her type it in. She handed me the phone again. Victoria's words filled the screen in neat, typed entries. The most recent one made my hands shake so violently I almost dropped the phone. Natalie called today about Thanksgiving. She sounded tired. Good. The herbal supplements I've been adding to her coffee when I visit are working. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make her foggy, forgetful. Dr. Reynolds mentioned she seemed scattered at her last checkup, building the narrative slowly. By next year, we should have enough documentation to suggest early-onset dementia. Tyler's lawyer friend says that would be grounds to challenge Grandpa's will, especially if we can show she was incompetent when he made those last changes. The entry was dated 3 weeks ago. I ran to the bathroom, throwing up until my stomach ached. Everything made sense now, the persistent headaches, the memory lapses I'd attributed to stress, the way I'd been forgetting appointments and misplacing things. Victoria had been poisoning me slowly, carefully, just enough to make me doubt myself, to erode my very being from the inside out. This was a chilling manifestation of covert abuse, where the perpetrator subtly undermines the victim's stability and sense of reality without overt violence, often leaving the victim isolated and disbelieved. Ruby appeared in the doorway with a glass of water, her small face etched with concern. "I'm sorry you have to see all this." "You have nothing to apologize for," I rasped, rinsing my mouth and accepting the water gratefully. "How did you figure out what she was doing?" "Mom keeps the supplements in her purse. I looked them up online. They're not vitamins like the labels say. One of them can cause cognitive problems if you take too much over time." Ruby's voice wavered slightly. "I wanted to warn you sooner, but I was scared. Mom always knows when I'm upset, even when I don't show it. She can read me too well." I pulled Ruby into a fierce hug, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "You're incredibly brave. You know that, right?" She nodded against my shoulder. "Can we still stop her?" "Yes." I pulled back, looking into eyes that reflected both fear and a burgeoning hope. "But we're going to do this carefully. Your mom thinks she's the smartest person in any room. We're going to use that against her." Over the next 2 days, I contacted my own attorney, a man Victoria had never met. Lawrence Finch had handled Grandpa William's estate, and he'd been trying to reach me for weeks about some irregularities he'd noticed. I'd missed his calls, thanks to Victoria's helpful suggestions that I was overwhelmed and should let her screen my messages. Lawrence's jaw tightened as I played Ruby's recordings in his office. "This is beyond estate fraud. Your sister's committed multiple felonies." He made several notes, his pen scratching urgently across the paper. "The question is how we proceed without tipping her off. I want everything documented before she comes home," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Every illegal transfer, every instance of her drugging me, every lie she's told about Ruby. When Victoria walks off that cruise ship, I want the police waiting." Lawrence nodded slowly. "That's ambitious. We have 4 days left. Then we better work fast." The first priority was securing my medical evidence. Lawrence connected me with Dr. Patricia Owens, a toxicologist specializing in cases of deliberate poisoning. She reviewed my recent medical history with growing concern, particularly the blood work from my last physical that showed elevated levels of certain compounds. "Your primary care physician noted these abnormalities, but attributed them to stress," Dr. Owens explained, her fingers tracing the lab results on her screen. "Looking at the supplements your sister was using, the correlation is clear. She was administering a combination that, while not immediately lethal, would produce cumulative cognitive effects over time." I sat in her sterile examination room, feeling violated in ways I couldn't articulate. "How long before permanent damage would have occurred?" "You're fortunate you discovered this when you did. Another 6 months of consistent exposure could have resulted in irreversible neurological issues." She ordered comprehensive testing, drawing what felt like dozens of vials of blood. "We'll document everything. The prosecution will need irrefutable medical evidence." Ruby accompanied me to these appointments, sitting quietly while doctors poked and prodded. She brought a sketchbook, spending the waiting time drawing intricate patterns, her pencil moving with focused precision. During one particularly long wait, she showed me what she'd been creating, a detailed map of her house, with annotations marking where Victoria kept various items. "Her filing cabinet has a false bottom," Ruby said, pointing to her careful drawing. "I saw her put papers there once when she thought I was napping. The key is taped under her desk drawer." "How observant have you had to be?" The question came out sadder than I'd intended. Ruby shrugged, a gesture that seemed far too world-weary for an 8-year-old. "When you can't talk, people forget you're listening. Mom would have entire conversations on the phone right in front of me. She'd leave documents open on her laptop while I played nearby. I think she forgot I could read." The realization hit me hard. Victoria had been so convinced of her own superiority, so certain that Ruby's silence meant ignorance, that she'd become spectacularly careless. Her own daughter had been gathering evidence for over a year, waiting for the right moment to expose everything. Lawrence arranged for a forensic accountant, Margaret Chin, to examine my financial records. Margaret arrived at my house with 2 assistants and multiple laptops, transforming my dining room into a makeshift investigation center. Ruby watched with fascination as they worked, occasionally offering insights that made Margaret's eyebrows rise. Your trust fund has been accessed 147 times over the past 3 years, Margaret said after the first day of analysis. The withdrawals were strategically timed and varied in amount to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. Whoever did this understood banking security protocols. Tyler worked in financial services before switching to consulting, I said. He'd know exactly how to exploit the system. Margaret nodded grimly. The transfers were laundered through shell companies, then redistributed to accounts in both their names. They purchased a vacation property in Vermont, invested in cryptocurrency, and made substantial improvements to their primary residence. All funded by your inheritance. The dollar amounts made me nauseous. Victoria and Tyler had lived well off my money, all while maintaining the facade of struggling parents dealing with their daughter's disability. They'd attended fundraisers, accepted donations from well-meaning friends, and played the sympathy card at every opportunity. There's another issue, Margaret continued, pulling up a different spreadsheet. They've been collecting disability benefits for Ruby, based on her supposed mutism. That's federal fraud on top of everything else. Ruby looked up from her drawing. I had to go to special therapy sessions twice a week. Mom made me sit there and pretend I couldn't communicate. The therapist was really nice, but I felt bad lying to her. You weren't lying, I said firmly. Your mother forced you into an impossible situation. None of this is your fault. We worked late into each evening, building a case Lawrence described as prosecutorial gold. Victoria's own meticulous record-keeping became her downfall. She documented everything, encrypted files she believed were secure, never imagining that Ruby had watched her enter passwords, had memorized patterns, had paid attention to every careless moment. On the 3rd night, while reviewing email correspondence between Victoria and Tyler, I found a thread that made my blood run cold. They'd been planning this for 5 years, since before Grandpa William had even shown signs of the illness that would eventually take his life. Victoria had encouraged his doctors to increase medications that caused confusion, had volunteered to manage his affairs, and had been positioning herself as his primary caregiver to influence his estate planning. The only thing that had disrupted her plans was Grandpa's sudden clarity in his final weeks. He changed his will with the help of a different attorney, one Victoria hadn't corrupted or controlled. He'd left everything to me, with a simple note. Natalie has always been honest. Trust her to do right. Those words took on new meaning now. Had he suspected Victoria's manipulations? Had he seen through her performance in ways the rest of us hadn't? I'd never know for certain, but the thought that he tried to protect me from beyond the grave brought tears to my eyes. Ruby found me crying in my office around midnight. Are you okay? Just thinking about your great-grandpa. He was a good man. I wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. Mom hated him, Ruby said matter-of-factly. She'd say nice things to his face, but complain about him constantly at home. She said he was stubborn and old-fashioned and didn't appreciate her. He appreciated honesty, I mused. Your mom probably found that threatening. Ruby climbed into my lap despite being almost too big for it. I'm glad he left everything to you. You'll use it for good things. Mom would have just spent it on herself. The investigation expanded to include Victoria's professional life. She worked as a consultant for nonprofit organizations, positioning herself as an expert in disability advocacy. Lawrence discovered she'd been inflating her credentials, claiming certifications she didn't have, and accepting speaking fees under false pretenses. Her entire career was built on exploiting Ruby's condition. She's given at least 30 presentations over the past 2 years, Lawrence said, showing me Victoria's speaking calendar. Each one paid between $2,000 and $5,000. She wrote articles, appeared on podcasts, and cultivated a social media following, all while forcing her daughter to maintain a lie. The scope of the deception was staggering. Victoria hadn't just committed fraud against me. She'd built an empire of lies that touched dozens of organizations and hundreds of people who trusted her expertise. Parents of children with disabilities had sought her advice. Schools had implemented her recommendations. She'd influenced policy decisions based on fabricated experiences. Ruby's recordings became crucial evidence for these additional charges. Several videos showed Victoria coaching Ruby before public appearances, reminding her to act natural and not make eye contact when people talk to you. In one particularly damning clip, Victoria practiced her presentation about embracing your child's silence, while Ruby sat in the background, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to scream during those speeches," Ruby told me later. "Mom would talk about accepting me as I was, but she never accepted me. She created me." The girl she described in those presentations wasn't real. Dr. Owens connected us with a child psychologist, Dr. Raymond Torres, who specialized in cases involving parental manipulation. His assessment of Ruby took several sessions, during which he documented the sophisticated gaslighting tactics Victoria had employed. "Ruby exhibits signs of complex trauma," Dr. Torres explained during our consultation. "Her mother didn't just force her silence. She created an entire false reality and punished Ruby psychologically for any deviation from the script." The fact that Ruby maintained her sense of self enough to document and ultimately expose this demonstrates remarkable resilience. Will she be okay? The question felt woefully inadequate for what I truly wanted to know. With proper support and therapy, yes. She's already shown incredible strength. The key now is helping her understand that speaking her truth was the right choice, regardless of the consequences for her mother. Those consequences were mounting rapidly. Lawrence had coordinated with the district attorney's office, and an assistant DA named Jennifer Walsh was building a case that spanned multiple jurisdictions and charge categories. She visited my house on the fourth day, reviewing everything we'd compiled with the intensity of someone preparing for war. "This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen," Jennifer said, her laptop screen reflecting off her glasses as she scrolled through documents. "The challenge will be presenting it coherently to a jury. Your sister's crimes are extensive but complex." "What about Ruby?" I asked, my heart clenching. "Will she have to testify?" "Almost certainly. Her testimony about the forced mutism is crucial." Jennifer looked at Ruby, who'd been listening from the kitchen table. "Would you be comfortable talking about your experiences in court?" Ruby nodded without hesitation. "I want people to know the truth. All of it." Jennifer spent an hour preparing Ruby for what to expect. The formality of court, the types of questions she'd face, the presence of Victoria and Tyler. Ruby absorbed everything with the same focused attention she'd applied to her year of secret observation. "Mom will try to say I'm lying," Ruby said calmly. "She'll say Aunt Natalie coached me or that I'm confused. But I have proof. Lots of proof." "Yes, you do," Jennifer agreed. "And that proof is going to make all the difference." The night before Victoria's return, I barely slept. Ruby had fallen asleep on the couch around 10, exhausted from days of interviews, appointments, and preparation. I carried her to bed, tucking her in and watching her peaceful face in the dim glow of her nightlight. She looked so young, so vulnerable. Victoria had stolen 8 years of her childhood, turning her daughter into a prop for personal gain. I returned to the living room where Lawrence and Margaret were finalizing documents. The dining room table was covered with evidence: bank statements, medical records, recordings, photographs, emails, everything we needed to destroy Victoria's carefully constructed lies. "Second thoughts?" Lawrence asked, reading my expression. "None. I just want this to be over." I picked up one of Ruby's school photos from the table. A picture from 2 years ago where her smile looked forced, her eyes empty. "She deserves better than what Victoria gave her." "She's getting it now," Margaret said softly. "You're giving her a real chance at a normal life." Morning came with gray skies and a steady drizzle. Ruby dressed carefully, choosing an outfit we'd picked out together, something that made her look her age rather than the formal clothes Victoria always insisted on. We drove to the pier in silence, both of us lost in thoughts about what the next few hours would bring. Ruby had been staying with me since my family left for the cruise. Victoria had arranged it weeks ago, probably planning for me to be incapacitated by the poisoned tea. Instead, Ruby became my secret weapon. She knew where Victoria kept financial records, which laptop she used for personal business, and every password she'd ever mentioned aloud. With Lawrence's guidance, We methodically documented everything. I gave blood samples showing the presence of the supplements Victoria had been feeding me. We retrieved deleted emails between Victoria and Tyler discussing the inheritance challenge. Ruby's videos provided irrefutable proof of the systematic deception regarding her supposed mutism. The most damning evidence came from Victoria's own files. She'd been meticulous in her planning, keeping spreadsheets of every withdrawal from my trust fund, every expenditure she'd covered with my money, and every lie she'd told to justify her access. Her arrogance had made her sloppy. She never considered that anyone would look, much less find everything she'd hidden. On the third day, I received a text from Victoria, having wonderful time. Ruby behaving. Miss you, sis. I stared at those words, thinking about all the times she'd called me sis, while plotting my destruction. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed back, Ruby's perfect. See you soon. Lawrence had coordinated with the district attorney's office. The evidence we'd compiled, financial records, medical documentation, Ruby's testimony and recordings, built an airtight case: white-collar crimes, attempted poisoning, child exploitation, and fraud. Victoria had been busy. There's something else we need to address, Lawrence said during our final meeting before Victoria's return. Ruby's welfare. Given everything she's experienced, we should involve Child Protective Services. Ruby had been sitting quietly in the corner of his office, coloring. Her head snapped up. No, I want to stay with Aunt Natalie. That's not my decision, sweetheart, Lawrence said gently. But I'll make sure everyone knows that's your preference. The cruise ship docked on Saturday morning. I'd received regular updates from Victoria throughout the week, cheerful messages about shipboard activities, photos of my parents smiling in tropical ports, and promises to bring me back souvenirs. Each text felt like another small betrayal. I met them at the pier with Ruby. My parents emerged first, tanned and relaxed. Mom hugged me tightly. We missed you so much. How was your week? Enlightening, I said, the word tasting bitter. Victoria appeared moments later with Tyler, her smile broad and genuine looking. She'd always been an excellent actress. Natalie. And there's my baby girl. She reached for Ruby, who instinctively slipped behind me instead. Victoria's smile flickered. Ruby, come give mommy a hug. No thank you, Ruby said clearly. The entire pier seemed to go silent. My parents froze. Tyler's face went pale. Victoria's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear, before settling on forced delight. Ruby, you spoke. Victoria's voice pitched high. Oh my goodness, this is wonderful. When did this happen? I've always been able to speak, Ruby said calmly. You made me pretend I couldn't. But I'm done pretending now. Tyler grabbed Victoria's arm. What is she talking about? Before Victoria could answer, 2 police officers approached. Victoria Brennan. Tyler Brennan, we need you to come with us. The confrontation that followed played out like a surreal nightmare. Victoria denied everything at first, her voice rising as she insisted Ruby was confused, possibly traumatized by finally speaking after years of silence. She appealed to our parents, tears streaming down her face as she painted herself as the victim of some misunderstanding. Then the officers mentioned the evidence, the recordings, the financial records, the medical tests showing I'd been systematically poisoned. Victoria's mask cracked. Natalie, please. We can work this out. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Raising Ruby alone, basically, with Tyler working constantly. The medical bills. I made mistakes, but I'm your sister. You tried to destroy me. My voice came out steady despite the tears blurring my vision. You used your own daughter as a pawn. You poisoned me. You stole from me. And you did it all while pretending to love me. I do love you. Victoria's desperation made her ugly. This is all a misunderstanding. Ruby's been confused her whole life. She doesn't know what she's saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Ruby's small voice cut through Victoria's protests. You made me lie for 8 years. You threatened Daddy, threatened Aunt Natalie, and made me watch you hurt people. I'm not confused. I'm just done being quiet. The officers led Victoria and Tyler away in handcuffs. My parents stood frozen, their vacation glow fading as they tried to process what had just unfolded. Mom reached for me, her hand trembling. Natalie, what happened? I told them everything. Right there on the pier, surrounded by confused travelers and curious onlookers, I detailed Victoria's years of deception. I showed them Ruby's recordings on my phone. I explained about the trust fund, the poisoning, and the inheritance scheme. Mom cried. Dad looked like someone had physically struck him. They kept apologizing, though none of this was their fault. They'd been as thoroughly deceived as I had been. How could we not see it? Mom whispered. Our own daughter. She was good at hiding it, I said. She made a career out of appearing perfect. The legal proceedings took months. Victoria attempted multiple defenses, claiming Ruby had been coached, suggesting I'd fabricated evidence out of jealousy, even trying to paint herself as mentally ill and not responsible for her actions. Nothing stuck. The evidence was overwhelming, and Ruby's testimony proved devastating. Tyler took a plea deal, testifying against Victoria in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation revealed even more offshore accounts, forged documents, and plans to discredit me that stretched back years. He'd been a willing participant in every scheme. The worst part was learning how long it had been going on. Victoria had started small, testing boundaries after Grandpa William first created our trust funds when we were teenagers. A small withdrawal here, a transfer there. When no one noticed, she got bolder. By the time Grandpa died and left me his estate, she'd already stolen nearly $200,000 from my trust. This was a classic case of narcissistic entitlement, a core trait of the dark triad, where an individual believes they are inherently superior and deserving of special treatment, often leading to a profound lack of empathy for others' well-being in their pursuit of personal gain. Ruby's situation proved more complex. Child services got involved, as Lawrence had predicted. There were interviews, psychological evaluations, and countless meetings. Throughout it all, Ruby remained remarkably composed, answering questions with a clarity that impressed everyone who spoke with her. The psychologist's report painted a troubling picture. Ruby had developed sophisticated coping mechanisms to survive her mother's manipulation. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to observe without reacting, and to protect herself by appearing to comply while secretly documenting everything. The report recommended extensive therapy, but noted Ruby's resilience and strong attachment to me. After 6 weeks of evaluations and hearings, I was granted temporary custody. Mom and Dad supported the decision, though the situation had aged them visibly. They'd lost one daughter to prison and struggled to reconcile the Victoria they'd known with the monster revealed in court. How did we raise someone capable of this? Dad asked one evening, sitting in my living room while Ruby did homework at the kitchen table. You didn't raise this, I said firmly. Victoria made her own choices. You gave her the same love and values you gave me. What she did with them was her decision. He nodded, though I could see the guilt still eating at him. Parents always blamed themselves, even when there's no logical reason to do so. This feeling of guilt, particularly when a child commits egregious acts, is a form of intergenerational trauma, the emotional and psychological wounds passed down through family lines, often manifesting as self-blame and a struggle to reconcile past ideals with present realities. Victoria was sentenced to 12 years for fraud, attempted poisoning, and child endangerment. Tyler received 8 years. They both appealed, of course, but the convictions held. On the day of sentencing, Victoria finally dropped her mask of contrition. She stared at me across the courtroom, her expression cold, venomous. You always had to be the special one, she hissed. Grandpa's favorite. Everyone's little princess. I was older, smarter, more accomplished, but nothing was ever good enough because you existed. Her words should have hurt. Instead, I felt only pity. I never competed with you, Victoria. You were fighting a war I didn't even know existed. Exactly, she spat. You got everything without even trying, without even caring. Do you know what that's like? Watching someone coast through life on charm and luck, while you work yourself to the bone. I worked too, I said quietly. I built my career, my life, my relationships. You just never saw it, because you were too busy resenting me for existing. The bailiff led her away, still ranting. I never saw my sister again outside of official contexts. She wrote me letters from prison, long, rambling things that alternated between justification and blame. I read the first few before Lawrence advised me to stop. Nothing Victoria said would change what happened or provide the closure I needed. Closure came from other places. From Ruby thriving in therapy, slowly learning to trust again. From watching her make friends at her new school, speaking freely without fear. From the first time she called me Mom by accident, then looked terrified until I smiled and said it was okay. "You're more of a mom than she ever was," Ruby told me later. Real moms don't hurt their kids. We established new routines, new traditions. Sunday morning pancakes, Thursday game nights. Ruby joined the school choir, her voice clear and strong. She made honor roll. She laughed more. The shadows in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by the light of a child finally allowed to be herself. My parents struggled, but tried their best. Mom threw herself into being the grandmother she'd missed out on being while Ruby was silenced. Dad built Ruby a treehouse and spent weekends teaching her woodworking. They were trying to make up for lost time, for not seeing the truth sooner. I forgave them. There was nothing to forgive, really. Victoria had fooled everyone, and punishing my parents for her sins served no purpose. We were all victims of her narcissism and greed. The trust fund was restored. The stolen money recovered through asset seizures and court orders. Grandpa William's estate remained mine, his final wishes honored. I sometimes wondered if he'd suspected Victoria's true nature. He'd always been perceptive, even in his final years. Maybe leaving everything to me had been his way of protecting his legacy from someone who'd see it only as leverage. Lawrence helped me establish a new trust for Ruby, protected by multiple safeguards and oversight measures. She'd never have to worry about someone stealing from her the way Victoria had stolen from me. Financial security couldn't undo the trauma, but it could provide stability as she healed. Lawrence also helped me establish a foundation in Grandpa William's name dedicated to supporting children who'd experienced parental manipulation or abuse. Part of the recovered funds went toward this cause, transforming Victoria's theft into something positive. Grandpa would have approved. As Ruby's 9th birthday approached, she asked for something unexpected. "Can we visit, Mom? Just once." The request caught me off guard. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "I think I need to see her, to say goodbye properly." Ruby's expression was thoughtful, not distressed. "Dr. Torres says closure is important." I consulted with both Dr. Torres and Lawrence before agreeing. The prison visit was scheduled for a weekday afternoon, giving us privacy. Ruby dressed carefully for it, choosing clothes Victoria had never seen, outfits that reflected Ruby's actual preferences rather than her mother's imposed style. The visiting room was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. Harsh fluorescent lights, industrial furniture, and the lingering smell of disinfectant. Victoria entered wearing a prison jumpsuit that aged her. Her hair pulled back severely, her face bare of the makeup she'd always considered essential. She stopped short when she saw Ruby. "Baby, you came." "I'm not a baby anymore," Ruby said calmly. "I'm 9 next week." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I've missed so much. Your birthday, the holidays, everything. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. You know that, right? Aunt Natalie turned you against me." "No." Ruby's voice stayed level. "You turned me against you when you made me lie for 8 years. When you threatened Daddy. When you hurt Aunt Natalie. I came here to tell you that I forgive you, but I don't want you in my life anymore." "Ruby, please. I'm happy now. I have friends. I sing in the choir. I talk whenever I want without being afraid. You took those things from me for a long time, but I have them back now." Ruby stood, ready to leave. "I hope you get help. I hope you figure out why you needed to hurt people, but I'm not going to wait for that. I'm moving on." Victoria looked at me, her expression desperate. "You did this. You poisoned her against me." "I gave her the truth," I said quietly. "Everything else was her choice." We left Victoria crying in the visiting room. Ruby remained composed until we reached the parking lot, then fell apart in my arms. I held her while she sobbed out 8 years of complicated emotions, love and betrayal, loss and relief, anger and grief, all tangled together. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked when the tears finally subsided. "You did exactly what you needed to do. I'm so proud of you." Ruby's birthday party the following week was a celebration of everything she'd reclaimed. Friends from school filled my backyard, their voices creating a joyful chaos that would have horrified Victoria's need for control. Ruby sang karaoke off-key, ate too much cake, and laughed until her sides hurt. Watching her simply being a kid felt like witnessing a miracle. 2 years after Victoria's sentencing, Ruby and I were officially sitting in family court for the final adoption hearing. She wore a blue dress she'd picked out herself and gripped my hand tightly as the judge reviewed our paperwork. "Ruby," the judge said kindly, "do you understand what adoption means?" "Yes, Your Honor. It means Natalie, becomes my legal mother forever." Ruby's voice stayed steady. "And is that what you want more than anything?" The judge smiled. "Then it's my honor to grant this petition. Congratulations to you both." Ruby threw her arms around me, and I held her close, feeling tears stream down my face. This child who'd been forced into silence had found her voice. This girl, who'd been used as a weapon, had become a beacon of strength. We'd both survived Victoria's betrayal and built something better from the ashes. Walking out of the courthouse, Ruby slipped her hand into mine. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you think Mom Victoria will ever understand what she did wrong?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people are too wrapped up in their own pain to see the pain they cause others. Your birth mother made choices based on jealousy and greed. Whether she ever recognizes that isn't something we can control." "I feel bad sometimes," Ruby admitted, "for helping put her in prison." "You didn't put her there. Her actions did. You just told the truth." I stopped walking and crouched down to Ruby's level. "You saved us both. What you did took incredible courage. You should never feel guilty for that." She nodded, processing this. "I'm glad I told you, even though it was scary." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." We walked to the car in comfortable silence. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, but no longer threatening. Victoria's shadow no longer hung over us. Ruby was free to speak, to grow, to become whoever she wanted to be, without manipulation or control. I'd lost a sister, but gained a daughter. The trade seemed impossibly unfair. I never should have had to choose. But given the reality of Victoria's betrayal, I'd make the same choice every time. Ruby deserved protection, love, and a chance at a normal childhood. That night, we celebrated with Ruby's favorite pizza and a movie marathon. My parents joined us, bringing flowers and a photo album they'd started. Pictures of Ruby actually smiling, actually talking, actually living without pretense. Mom cried happy tears while showing Ruby pictures of herself at various school events, choir performances, and family dinners. "Look how beautiful you are when you smile," Mom said, pointing to a recent photo. "Really smile? Not the fake ones from before." Ruby studied the pictures thoughtfully. "I look different now." "You look free," I said. Later, after my parents left and Ruby was tucked into bed, I sat alone in the living room. The thermos Victoria had left, the one filled with poison tea, sat in an evidence box in my closet. The police had returned it after the trial, along with other items they'd seized. I kept it, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe as a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. Maybe as proof that monsters don't always look like monsters. My phone buzzed with a new email. Another letter from Victoria had been scanned and sent by the prison system. I deleted it without reading. Whatever she wanted to say, whatever justifications or accusations she crafted didn't matter anymore. She'd lost the right to my attention when she chose cruelty over love. Ruby appeared in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Can't sleep. Just thinking. Come here." I patted the couch beside me. She curled up against my side, her head resting on my shoulder. We sat quietly for a while, listening to the house settle around us. "Do you ever miss how things were before?" Ruby asked softly. "When everything seemed normal?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but that normal was built on lies. This might be harder, but it's real. I'll take messy truth over comfortable lies any day." "Me too," Ruby yawned. "Natalie." "Yeah. Thank you for believing me. When I told you about the tea, you could have thought I was crazy. I could never think that. You're the bravest, smartest kid I know." I kissed the top of her head. And you're mine now. Forever. Forever, she echoed sleepily. Sitting there with Ruby in my arms, I thought about the path that had led us to this moment. Victoria's betrayal had been devastating, the kind of wound that never fully heals. But from that betrayal had come unexpected gifts, a daughter I loved fiercely, a clarity about what truly mattered, and the knowledge that we'd survived the worst and come out stronger. The cruise Victoria had planned was supposed to be my end. Instead, it marked a beginning. Ruby found her voice. I found my strength. Together, we built a family based on trust instead of manipulation, on love instead of obligation. Victoria was still out there, locked away, but alive. Sometimes, I wondered if she thought about us, if she felt any genuine remorse. Mostly, though, I didn't think about her at all. She'd stolen enough of my time, my peace, and my trust. I wouldn't give her any more. Ruby shifted in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't quite make out. I adjusted my position carefully, trying not to wake her, and pulled a blanket over us both. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Therapy appointments, school projects, the everyday complexities of raising a child who'd been through trauma. But tonight, we were safe. We were together. We were home. And that thermos of poison tea? It would stay in that evidence box, a relic of a life we'd left behind. A reminder that sometimes the worst betrayals come from those we trust most, but also that survival is possible. Healing is possible. Love, real and unconditional, is possible. Ruby had spoken her truth, and in doing so, she freed us both. That was worth more than any inheritance, any trust fund, or any version of normal that required silence and lies. The past couldn't be changed. Victoria's crimes couldn't be undone. But the future, our future, stretched ahead full of possibility. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If someone you loved implicitly, someone you would trust with your life, suddenly showed you a carefully crafted lie that spanned years, how would you find the courage to dismantle it, knowing the truth would shatter everything?